The ocean has a reputation. People say it erases evidence, that it swallows mistakes, that once something disappears beneath the surface, the truth goes with it. It's why so many unanswered questions end at the shoreline. Why so many investigations stop where the water begins. Why families are told, quietly, gently, that there will never be closure. Because the ocean doesn't give things back. Or so we're told. Every year people vanish at sea. Cruise passengers, sailors, vacationers who step too close to the edge of something they don't understand. Their names are logged, their cases summarized, and eventually they become numbers buried in reports no one reads. Most of the time, the explanation is simple. An accident, a tragic fall, a moment of poor judgment, and sometimes something darker. But every now and then, a disappearance refuses to stay buried. Every now and then, the story doesn't end where it's supposed to. This is one of those stories. On paper, this case looks ordinary. A teenage girl, a cruise ship, open ocean, no witnesses, no body. Within 48 hours, authorities would decide what happened. Within weeks, a funeral would be held. Within months, the world would move on. But for one woman, one mother, the truth never settled. It sat in her chest, heavy and unmoving like something unfinished. Because what vanished that night wasn't just her daughter. It was certainty. It was trust. It was the belief that the people responsible for protecting the truth had actually tried to find it. The ocean doesn't talk. It doesn't correct mistakes. It doesn't testify. It doesn't defend the innocent. And sometimes, that silence is exactly what allows the wrong story to survive. This is not a story about the sea. It's about what happened before anyone ever looked over the railing. It's about what happened after the search lights shut off. And it's about how quickly a life can be erased when the explanation is convenient enough. Her name was Eliza Carter. She was 16 years old. At 16, life is still mostly potential. Plans exist in notebooks. Dreams are half-formed. Futures feel close enough to touch, even if they're blurry around the edges. Eliza was quiet but observant, not withdrawn, just thoughtful. The kind of teenager who listened more than she spoke, who noticed details other people missed. She liked structure, lists, routines, familiar things. And she was afraid of deep water. That detail would matter later. It just wouldn't matter to the people writing the report. In March of 2018, Eliza boarded a cruise ship with her mother and stepfather. A family vacation according to the itinerary. 7 days at sea, warm weather, distractions, a chance to reset. From the outside, it looked normal. From the inside, it was. But no one asks about what feels wrong when nothing looks wrong yet. The ship was massive, a floating city with restaurants, theaters, pools, casinos, and thousands of passengers moving through narrow hallways like strangers sharing a dream they'd forget when it ended. Once the ship left port, the world shrank. No easy exits. No private corners. Just water in every direction. For some people, that feels like freedom. For others, it feels like being trapped. By the time the ship reached open ocean, Eliza had already retreated inward. Her mother, Naomi Carter, noticed it but brushed it off. Teenagers get quiet. Teenagers pull away. Naomi told herself this was normal. She had spent years learning how to explain away discomfort. Her husband, Victor Hale, didn't seem concerned. Victor rarely showed emotion at all. He was calm, polite, measured, the kind of man who never rushed his words and never explained more than necessary. To strangers, he seemed dependable, solid, a provider. To Eliza, he felt distant. Not cruel. Not openly hostile. Just present in a way that made the air feel tighter. But again, nothing that could be proven, nothing that could be named. And so it went unspoken. On the third night of the cruise, the ship was quieting down. Music faded. Lights dimmed. Passengers returned to their cabins. That night would later be described as uneventful. No arguments reported. No disturbances logged. No alarms triggered. Nothing that would slow the story down. When investigators later summarized the incident, they would reduce everything to a handful of timestamps. A door opening. A phone signal. A discovery by a crew member hours later. What those timestamps don't show is the space between them. They don't show what someone was thinking. They don't show who was watching. They don't show what choices were made when no one else was around. And they don't show what happens when the wrong assumptions are made too early. At sea, time feels different. Night stretches longer, silence carries farther, and when something goes wrong, it's easier to believe it was inevitable rather than intentional. That belief shapes everything that follows. Because once a story is decided, evidence is only useful if it supports it. By morning, Eliza Carter would be gone. And by the end of that day, the ocean would be blamed. But the ocean never confessed. It never confirmed what happened. It never explained how a 16-year-old girl disappeared without a sound. It never answered the questions her mother would ask for years afterward. It simply stayed quiet. And in that quiet, a lie had room to grow. This was not the first disappearance at sea, but it would become one of the most unsettling. Because 6 years later, the ocean would be proven innocent. And the truth would surface somewhere no one expected, far from the water, under bright sunlight, in a place where the dead aren't supposed to walk. And this story doesn't begin with a fall. It begins with a family that didn't feel right, a night that wasn't watched closely enough, and a silence that people were far too willing to accept. Family vacations are supposed to feel light. They're meant to soften edges, to create memories strong enough to survive arguments, distance, and time. They're meant to convince everyone, especially the people inside the family, that things are working. This one didn't. From the outside, the Carter family looked ordinary. A mother, a stepfather, a teenage daughter. 3 people sharing a cabin on a cruise ship large enough to swallow thousands of stories at once. But inside that small, carefully arranged space, the air felt different. Heavier. Eliza Carter was 16 years old, but she didn't move through the world carelessly. She was observant, quiet in a way that suggested thought, not shyness. The kind of teenager who noticed tone changes, pauses in conversation, and the way people watched when they thought no one was paying attention. She had learned over time how to stay out of the way. Her mother, Naomi Carter, noticed the distance, but she misread it. She thought Eliza was growing up, becoming independent, pulling inward the way teenagers do when childhood starts slipping away. Naomi told herself this was normal, because admitting something wasn't normal would have meant asking questions she wasn't ready to hear the answers to. Naomi had been tired for a long time. Long before the cruise. Long before the ocean. She worked full-time. She carried the emotional weight of a blended family, and she had learned how to smooth over discomfort in order to keep peace. When Victor entered her life, he felt like stability. Victor Hale didn't shout. He didn't argue loudly. He didn't drink too much or lose control. He was calm in a way that felt reassuring, especially to someone who had already lived through chaos once before. Victor handled things. Victor paid for things. Victor planned the cruise. And when Naomi felt doubt rise, she pushed it down. Eliza didn't have that luxury. She didn't dislike Victor in a way she could explain. She didn't accuse him of anything. She just didn't feel safe enough to relax around him. There was a tension she couldn't name, a sense of being watched without being seen. Victor rarely touched her, rarely raised his voice, rarely did anything that would raise concern on its own. But his presence lingered. On the ship, that feeling intensified. There was nowhere to go. No bedrooms to retreat into. No friends to escape with. No familiar routines. Just narrow hallways, shared walls, and the constant awareness of where everyone else was. Victor insisted on keeping their cabin organized. Everything had its place. Nothing was moved without comment. When Eliza left her backpack on the bed, he corrected her. When she stayed out too long on deck, he asked questions. Not angrily, not accusingly, just enough to remind her she was being noticed. Naomi interpreted this as concern. A stepfather trying to be involved. A man trying to protect his family in an unfamiliar environment. She didn't see what Eliza saw. Or maybe, on some level, she didn't want to. The cruise itinerary was packed. Breakfast buffets, shore excursions, evening shows. Victor liked structure. He liked schedules. He liked knowing where people were supposed to be and when. Eliza often lagged behind. She lingered at railings, but never too close. She watched the water from a distance. She spent time alone, sketching in a small notebook she kept tucked into her bag. She didn't write about the future. She wrote about feelings she didn't know how to say out loud. At night, Naomi noticed Eliza stayed awake longer than usual. Her cabin light on. Her headphones in. Her back turned. Naomi assumed she was texting friends. She didn't ask who. Victor, on the other hand, noticed everything. He noticed when Eliza left the cabin. He noticed when she returned. He noticed the way she avoided sitting next to him. But he never addressed it directly. He didn't need to. On the third night of the cruise, Naomi went to bed early. She had a headache. The motion of the ship had worn her down. She took medication and closed her eyes, trusting that her family was safe within arm's reach. Victor stayed awake. He told Naomi he'd spend some time in the casino lounge. Just a drink, maybe two. Eliza said she wanted fresh air. It didn't sound strange. Teenagers want space. Cruise ships offer endless distractions. Nothing about it set off alarms. And that's the problem with warning signs. They almost never announce themselves loudly enough to stop what's coming. When Naomi later tried to replay the night in her mind, she would fixate on small things. The way Victor answered too quickly when she asked where Eliza was. The way he didn't seem surprised she wanted to be alone. The way the cabin felt emptier than it should have. At the time, none of it mattered. Afterward, all of it did. Eliza left the cabin quietly. No argument. No confrontation. No slammed door. Just a teenager stepping into a hallway that felt longer than it should have. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. And no one followed her. That was the last moment the Carter family existed as a family. Not because someone disappeared, but because something was already broken. They just didn't know it yet. By the time Eliza reached deck 11, the ship was nearly silent. And whatever had been building inside that family, unspoken, unresolved, ignored, was about to surface in a way no one could undo. Because families don't fall apart all at once. They fracture slowly, quietly, in moments people convince themselves don't matter. Until suddenly, one moment is all that's left. At sea, night doesn't arrive suddenly. It settles in layers. First, the music fades. Then the laughter thins. Then the hallways grow quiet enough that footsteps echo longer than they should. By the early morning hours, the ship no longer feels like a vacation. It feels like a machine moving through darkness, carrying people who are half asleep and unaware of how vulnerable they are. This is the hour when mistakes go unnoticed. This is the hour when no one is watching closely. At 2:07 a.m., the door to cabin 814 quietly opened. Security cameras captured the moment from down the hallway. The footage is grainy, muted, almost impersonal. A teenage girl steps out. Eliza Carter. She's wearing casual clothes, nothing unusual, nothing that suggests urgency or distress. She doesn't rush, she doesn't hesitate. She closes the door behind her. And she walks away. This is the last time she is clearly seen. The hallway is empty. No one follows her. No one stops her. No one asks where she's going. Cruise ships are designed to feel safe. Bright lights, open spaces, constant activity. But at night, those same spaces stretch and hollow out. The ship is still moving. Still alive. Just quieter. Eliza heads toward deck 11. We know this because her keycard registers movement through a secure door at 2:11 a.m. We know this because her phone briefly reconnects to the ship's Wi-Fi near the same area. And then the trail begins to thin. Deck 11 sits high above the water. During the day, it's busy, loungers, pool access, people leaning against railings with drinks in hand. At night, it empties out completely. Most passengers never see it like this. Dark, still, surrounded by nothing but black water. There are cameras on deck 11. Just not everywhere. The cruise line later describes it as a design limitation. Investigators would call it an unfortunate blind spot. A stretch of railing, just long enough for something important to happen without being recorded. At 2:14 a.m., Eliza's phone registers its final activity. Not a call. Not a message. A text draft. Unsent. No word saved. No recipient selected. Just an action and then nothing. Phones don't record fear. They don't capture hesitation. They don't explain why someone stops typing mid-thought. They only show that something interrupted the moment. After 2:14 a.m., there are no more digital breadcrumbs. No outgoing messages. No location pings. No camera footage. Eliza Carter disappears into a space the ship was never watching. Hours pass. The ship continues forward. Cabin doors open and close as passengers wake for breakfast. Staff members move through corridors doing what they always do, cleaning, restocking, resetting the illusion that nothing ever goes wrong here. No alarm is raised, because no one knows yet. At 6:42 a.m., a crew member conducting routine deck checks notices something out of place. A phone, lying near the railing. Not damaged, not wet. Just there. When the phone is turned on, it unlocks immediately. No password prompt. No emergency message. Just a home screen frozen in time. That single object would change everything. The moment Naomi Carter is told her daughter's phone has been found, panic erupts. Not confusion. Not concern. Panic. Because people don't leave their phones behind by accident. Not at 16, not in the middle of the ocean, not without telling anyone where they're going. Crew members begin retracing steps. Security is alerted. Supervisors are notified. Procedures are activated. But by the time anyone starts asking serious questions, hours have already slipped away. The ship slows. Search lights are activated. Crew members scan the water, their beams cutting across endless darkness. From above, the ocean looks calm. From below, it's unknowable. This is the point where the story could have gone in multiple directions. This is the point where assumptions matter. Because once officials decide what they think happened, everything that follows bends toward that conclusion. No one sees Eliza Carter on camera after 2:14 a.m. No one hears a disturbance. No one reports an argument. No one reports a struggle. And so, the simplest explanation begins to take shape. Teenager. Late night. Open deck. No witnesses. A narrative forms quietly, without ever being spoken out loud. What doesn't form is a question. Why was she there? Who knew she was there? And why does the last recorded action on her phone end mid-thought? By the time the ship turns back to search, the ocean has already erased the path behind it. By the time helicopters arrive, the ship has traveled miles. And by the time the search officially begins, it's already too late to reconstruct the night. At sea, time isn't just distance. It's evidence. And every minute that passes without answers makes the wrong story easier to accept. Eliza Carter didn't vanish loudly. She didn't trigger alarms. She didn't leave behind an explanation. She simply stepped into a space where no one was looking. And the silence that followed would soon become the official record. But silence is not proof. And absence is not an explanation. Because what happened at 2:14 a.m. was never seen, never challenged, and never truly investigated. And once a disappearance is framed as inevitable, the search for truth becomes optional. Panic doesn't arrive politely. It doesn't wait for confirmation or follow protocol. It explodes, sudden, overwhelming, and impossible to contain. For Naomi Carter, panic arrived the moment she understood what the phone meant. Not misplaced. Not forgotten. Left behind. When the knock came at the cabin door, it was gentle. Too gentle. A crew member stood in the hallway, posture careful, voice low. Naomi would later say she knew something was wrong before a single word was spoken, because no one wakes a mother this way for good news. They asked her to sit down. They asked her questions she couldn't answer. When was the last time she saw Eliza? What was she wearing? Did she say where she was going? Naomi's mind raced backward through the night, searching for something, anything, that would make this make sense. She found nothing. Victor was calm. That stood out immediately. While Naomi's voice rose, his stayed level. While she demanded answers, he offered explanations. She probably went out for air. She liked being alone sometimes. She must have dropped the phone. Each statement sounded reasonable. Each one quietly pushed the same idea forward, that this wasn't alarming. Not yet. But Naomi didn't feel reason. She felt terror. Within minutes, the ship's internal response system activated. Security officers began reviewing footage. Supervisors notified the bridge. A general alert went out, not to passengers but to staff. The goal wasn't transparency. It was containment. Cruise ships operate on image. Thousands of people on board, billions of dollars at stake, and one overriding priority: keep the illusion intact. Emergencies are handled quietly, disruptions are minimized, and anything that might cause panic among passengers is tightly controlled. A missing teenager threatened all of that. As the search escalated, Naomi was moved from place to place. A small office, a conference room, a waiting area with beige walls and no windows. Each room felt colder than the last. She was asked to repeat herself again and again. Her answers didn't change, but the way they were received did. At first, there was urgency. Crew members searched decks. Staff checked public areas. Announcements were prepared but never broadcast. But urgency has a shelf life. And once the phone was found near the railing, the tone shifted. Suddenly, questions narrowed. Had Eliza been upset recently? Did she struggle with anxiety? Was she taking medication? Naomi felt the focus turning, not toward finding her daughter, but toward explaining her absence. The ship slowed. Searchlights cut through the darkness, sweeping the water in wide, methodical arcs. From the deck, the ocean looked calm. Deceptively calm. Helicopters were requested. The Coast Guard was notified. A formal search radius was calculated, based not on certainty but on probability. Time became the enemy. Every minute the ship had continued forward before turning back expanded the search area. Every hour that passed reduced the chances of finding anything at all. Naomi clung to hope anyway. Because hope doesn't obey statistics. Victor stayed close, but not emotionally close. He didn't break down. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't challenge the direction things were taking. He stood beside Naomi, offering quiet reassurance while the narrative around them began to harden. By nightfall, officials delivered their first conclusion, carefully worded, framed as preliminary but heavy with implication. There were no signs of a struggle. No witnesses. No alerts triggered. In cases like this, they explained, outcomes were often tragic but straightforward. Naomi heard the words but rejected the meaning. Eliza was afraid of deep water. She wouldn't go near railings at night. She didn't take risks like that. But those details were written down without emphasis, footnotes in a report already leaning toward an answer. The search continued into the night. Helicopters scanned the surface, boats crisscrossed the area, but the ocean gave nothing back. No clothing. No movement. No sign that Eliza Carter had ever been there at all. By the second day, the tone changed again. Hope gave way to process. Search efforts were reduced. Updates grew less frequent. Officials began preparing Naomi for the likely outcome. This is how cases slip away. Not through malice. Not through cruelty. But through momentum. Once a disappearance fits a familiar pattern, it becomes easier to accept the pattern than to question it. Teenager. Late night. Open deck. The story writes itself. Naomi felt it happening in real time. She felt her daughter being turned into a conclusion. And she felt herself becoming inconvenient, an emotional obstacle to efficiency. When the ship finally docked, Eliza did not come with it. Passengers disembarked with souvenirs and photos. Vacations ended. Life resumed. For Naomi, time stopped. The official search would be called off soon after. The report would list possibilities. The cause would remain undetermined, but heavily implied. And the case would be quietly closed. No handcuffs. No suspects. No further questions. Just silence. But silence is not resolution. And procedure is not justice. Because when panic meets protocol, protocol always wins. And somewhere in that process, the truth slips through unnoticed. Cases don't always end with conclusions. Sometimes they end with decisions. Decisions made quietly. Decisions made quickly. Decisions made by people who will never have to live with the consequences. For Eliza Carter, the decision came less than 48 hours after she vanished. The wording mattered. It always does. Officials never said what definitely happened. They didn't need to. They spoke in probabilities, in patterns, in experience. In situations like this, based on similar cases, statistically speaking, language softened the absence of evidence. The report described Eliza as last seen alone. It noted the lack of witnesses. It referenced the location of her phone. And then, quietly, it introduced the conclusion without nomming it. There was no sign of foul play. Those 5 words changed everything. They didn't mean there wasn't foul play. They meant no one would look for it. Naomi didn't understand how the conclusion came so fast. She asked about camera blind spots. She asked about keycard data. She asked why no one interviewed passengers near Deck 11. She was told the answers were unlikely to change the outcome. That sentence settled heavily in her chest. Not because it was definitive, but because it was dismissive. Once the idea of an accident entered the narrative, everything else bent around it. Eliza's fear of deep water became irrelevant. Her future plans were brushed aside. Her unsent text was treated as meaningless. And Naomi's insistence that something felt wrong became emotional noise. This is how stories become official. Not because they're true, but because they're convenient. The cruise line issued a statement. It expressed sympathy. It confirmed cooperation with authorities. It emphasized passenger safety. What it didn't mention was responsibility. What it didn't mention was uncertainty. Eliza Carter's disappearance was no longer an investigation. It was a liability. When Naomi pushed back, she felt the shift immediately. Questions were answered with shorter replies. Meetings were postponed. Calls went unreturned. She was no longer a grieving mother. She was a problem. Victor didn't push. That was another thing Naomi would replay later. He didn't demand answers. He didn't argue with officials. He didn't express anger at the ship, the process, or the conclusion. He accepted it. Quietly, completely. Naomi told herself people grieve differently. She told herself not to judge. But something about his acceptance felt premature. The final report arrived weeks later. It was thin. Pages of procedural language. Timestamps. Search summaries. No suspects. No follow-up recommendations. Just a careful acknowledgement that Eliza Carter was presumed lost at sea. Presumed. That word would haunt Naomi. Because presumed is not proven. And lost is not explained. With the case closed, support evaporated. Investigators moved on. The cruise line stopped calling. The world expected Naomi to begin healing. But grief without answers doesn't heal. It stagnates. Naomi began to unravel. Sleep came in fragments. Days blurred together. Her thoughts looped endlessly back to the same questions. Why was Eliza on Deck 11? Why was her phone left behind? Why did no one ask who knew she was there? And perhaps most unsettling of all, why did Victor never ask those questions either? When Naomi brought it up, Victor reassured her. "You're torturing yourself," he said. "There's nothing more we can do." But Naomi didn't feel relief. She felt abandonment. Friends tried to help. They told her she was strong. They told her Eliza wouldn't want her suffering like this. They told her accidents happen. Each sentence felt like a small erasure. Grief turned inward. Naomi stopped eating regularly. Stopped answering calls. Stopped trusting her own instincts. She was told her doubts were part of trauma. That her mind was searching for meaning where none existed. But Naomi had raised Eliza for 16 years. She knew her routines, her fears, her boundaries. And this story didn't fit. As weeks turned into months, something else changed. Victor grew distant. He spent less time at home. He avoided conversations about Eliza. He spoke about the future as if the past had already been settled. It felt wrong. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just wrong. The case was closed. The paperwork was filed. Eliza Carter became a memory, one officially defined by an ocean that never spoke. But Naomi couldn't accept it. Because closure without truth isn't closure at all. It's surrender. And she wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. Funerals are meant to provide certainty. A beginning. An ending. A place where grief is allowed to land. But when there is no body, certainty becomes impossible. And grief has nowhere to go. The call came 2 weeks after Eliza disappeared. The search had officially ended. Not because answers were found, but because effort had been exhausted. The ocean had given nothing back. And so, Naomi Carter was asked to do the unthinkable. She was asked to bury her daughter without proof that her daughter was dead. The funeral director explained the process carefully. A symbolic service. An empty casket. A way to help the family move forward. Naomi nodded as if she understood. Inside, something broke. On the day of the funeral, the sky was clear. Cruelly clear. Friends and family gathered in neat rows, dressed in black, whispering condolences they hoped would sound comforting. "I'm so sorry. She's in a better place. At least she didn't suffer." Each sentence felt wrong, because no one knew what had happened. The casket was closed. It had to be. There was nothing inside. Naomi stood at the front of the room, staring at polished wood that represented a life still suspended somewhere between existence and erasure. She waited for something to happen, for grief to feel real, for tears to come naturally, for the world to acknowledge what had been taken. Instead, she felt hollow, as if the funeral itself was pretending. Victor Hale stood beside her, close enough to touch, distant enough to feel unreachable. He wore a dark suit. His expression was composed, controlled. He cried, but quietly. No shaking hands. No gasping breaths. No collapse. Just tears that fell neatly and stopped when the moment required it. Naomi noticed something then. Victor never once looked at the casket. Not during the service. Not during the prayers. Not even as it was lowered into the ground. When it was time to speak, Naomi couldn't. Her legs trembled. Her vision blurred. Her thoughts scattered. A friend read a short statement on her behalf. Words about Eliza's kindness, her potential, her love of routine. Things that sounded final. Naomi hated them. As soil hit wood, the sound echoed too loudly. A dull thud. Over and over. Each one felt like a lie being sealed underground. After the service, people hugged Naomi tightly, as if physical pressure could keep her from coming apart. Victor accepted condolences calmly. He thanked people. He nodded. He said very little. That night, Naomi didn't sleep. She lay awake, replaying the funeral in her mind. The closed casket. The silence. The way Victor had stood so still. And the thought that wouldn't leave her alone. You don't bury someone you believe might come back. In the days that followed, Naomi's world began to collapse inward. She stopped answering calls, stopped eating regularly, stopped leaving the house. Her grief was not loud. It was heavy. Victor changed too, but in a different way. He began staying out late. Sometimes he didn't come home at all. When Naomi asked where he had been, his answers were vague. Out. Clearing my head. I needed space. He stopped saying Eliza's name. Stopped correcting people when they spoke in the past tense. Stopped participating in grief altogether. Then 3 weeks after the funeral, Victor made a decision. Not during an argument. Not after a long discussion. Quietly, efficiently, Naomi came home one afternoon to find the house wrong. The closet was missing clothes. Drawers were half empty. Victor's documents were gone. She stood in the doorway, heart pounding, afraid to move. Afraid to confirm what she already knew. Victor left a note. Just one sentence. "I can't do this anymore." No explanation. No goodbye. No forwarding address. Within days, Victor filed for divorce. He refused counseling. Refused mediation. Refused to talk about Eliza. And then he vanished. His phone number was disconnected. His email accounts went dark. Mutual friends claimed they hadn't heard from him. It was as if he had erased himself completely. Naomi tried to tell herself people grieved differently. But this wasn't grief. This was disappearance. The man who paid for the cruise. The man who was awake the night Eliza vanished. The man who never looked inside the coffin. Had walked away without looking back. And that was the moment Naomi realized something terrifying. Eliza wasn't the only one who disappeared at sea. Victor Hale had disappeared on land. The case was closed. The funeral was over. The marriage was gone. And Naomi Carter was alone, with questions no one wanted to answer. But the truth has a way of resurfacing. Not immediately. Not gently. Sometimes it waits. 6 years later, Naomi would be standing in a crowded marketplace, thousands of miles from the ocean, when she would see a face she had buried. And behind that face, she would see Victor. Alive. Calm. Smiling. And in that moment, everything she had been told would collapse.